Okay, let's unpack this. Because right now, the Strait of Hormuz is the site of the absolute largest oil supply disruption in modern history.
Yeah, it really is.
And you have the United States basically demanding international warships. You have European allies heavily hesitating, calculating the geopolitical fallout of every single naval movement they could possibly make.
Right.
But then you look at India, and India just quietly sailed over 92,000 metric tons of vital liquefied petroleum gas right through the heart of this blockade.
Yeah, using nothing but sustained diplomatic engagement.
Which is just wild to think about. Welcome to the Deep Dive, everyone.
Glad to be here with you.
Today, we're really tearing into the immense friction between systems and individuals. We have this fascinating stack of sources to go through today.
We do, and it covers a lot of ground.
Exactly, from high-stakes geopolitics in the Middle East to massive democratic exercises right here at home, marginalized groups fighting for constitutional rights, and everyday people just trying to game corporate policies. We're looking at how power, diplomacy, and the rules are negotiated at literally every level of society as we head into Monday, March 16th, 2026.
And I think the real through line here, the thing connecting all these seemingly separate events, is that friction you mentioned.
Right.
You know, you design a system, say a global supply chain or an electoral process, and you expect precision.
Yeah.
You draw up the blueprint, you expect the machine to just work.
But then human beings get involved.
Exactly. You introduce human emotion, historical grievances, basic survival instincts into those blueprints, and, well, the gears just start to grind.
So let's start at the absolute macro level, where those gears are grinding the loudest right now. We need to talk about the Strait of Hormuz.
The stakes there couldn't really be higher.
No, they couldn't. Because when we say this is the largest oil supply disruption in history, we're not, using hyperbole. Our sources detail that since late February, 16 vessels have been attacked by Iran.
16! That's a massive number in such a short window.
It is, and it's a direct, calculated retaliation for U.S. and Israeli airstrikes on Iranian territory.
And to really wrap your head around the gravity of this, you have to look at the geography.
Right. Paint the picture for us.
Well, the Strait of Hormuz is incredibly narrow. We're talking only about 21 miles wide at its narrowest point.
Wow.
And the actual shipping lanes inside that are even narrower. It is this inescapable choke point for nearly 1/5 of the world's global oil shipments.
1/5. So if you want to move energy out of the Persian Gulf, you have to go through this specific tiny stretch of water.
Exactly. It's the jugular vein of the global energy market.
And right now, that vein essentially has a tourniquet around it. The global ripple effects are huge.
Yeah.
So let's look at how the world is responding, starting with the U.S.
Yeah.
President Donald Trump is actively calling for an international armada.
An armada?
Yeah, he wants allied nations to deploy their naval vessels to physically secure the waterway, basically trying to create this heavily armed escort service for commercial shipping.
Which is, a very classic kinetic response to a blockade. You meet the threat of force with an overwhelming display of counterforce.
That's the idea, yeah.
And the initial expectation from Washington was probably that multiple nations, especially those that rely heavily on oil from that strait, would just immediately join this coalition.
But when you actually look at the sources detailing the Allied response, it is, it's anything but a unified charge.
Not at all.
Nobody's rushing to put their warships in the crosshairs. And a big reason for that is Tehran explicitly stating that any tanker linked to the U.S., Israel, or their allies is now considered a legitimate military target.
Right, and they've even threatened to mine the waterway.
Which completely changes the risk calculus, doesn't it?
Oh, entirely. Mining the strait is the ultimate nightmare scenario for maritime logistics. I mean, it doesn't just stop ships. It fundamentally alters the insurability of any vessel even approaching the region.
Can't even get coverage to sail there.
Exactly. So look at the UK, for instance.
Right.
They're heavily invested in global maritime security, but right now, they are deliberately making no pledges to send warships.
Yeah, our sources say they're discussing the potential deployment of mine-hunting drones.
Right, mine-hunting drones, which feels like a very calculated half-step.
It really does. It's like you're participating in the security apparatus, but without putting a multi-billion-dollar destroyer and hundreds of actual sailors in the direct line of fire.
Precisely. It's technological participation without the intense political risk of a real naval engagement.
And then let's look at Japan. Because Japan is historically entirely reliant on Middle Eastern energy imports.
Almost completely dependent, yes.
You'd think they'd be the first to join an escort mission, but they're citing a very high legal and political threshold for any deployment. They're urging extreme caution.
Right, because for Japan, deploying military assets overseas, it's not just a simple policy decision.
No, it bumps right up against their constitution.
Exactly, Article 9 of their post-war constitution, which heavily restricts their military to a strict self-defense role. So sending warships to the Persian Gulf to potentially engage in combat, that is a massive, highly controversial domestic hurdle for them.
And then you have France, which I think provides maybe the most telling example of this Western hesitation.
Oh, definitely. France has a highly capable blue water navy.
But they are explicitly refusing to send vessels into the strait while the conflict is actively escalating. They are maintaining what they call a purely defensive posture.
Yeah, they've actually kept their flagship aircraft carrier, the Charles de Gaulle, parked way over in the eastern Mediterranean.
They aren't even moving it into the Red Sea, let alone the Arabian Sea.
No, they are keeping it significantly removed from the immediate theater. President Emmanuel Macron has been very clear that any French escort mission would only theoretically happen after the most intense phase of the military engagement has passed.
And even within the broader European Union, we're seeing ministers debate whether they should expand their existing naval mission, the one protecting ships from Houthi attacks near Yemen.
But nations like Germany are highly skeptical that a mission like that would even be effective in the much tighter, much more volatile confines of Hormuz.
Right. And then, we have China, a massive importer of Gulf oil, a strategic ally of Iran, completely avoiding any military commitment and pivoting entirely to diplomacy.
So the overall picture is the West essentially backing away slowly or trying to build a fortress from a safe distance.
Exactly. But here is where it gets absolutely fascinating. Because amidst all this militarized gridlock, our sources detail an entirely different approach from India.
Yes, and it's a stunning contrast.
India's External Affairs Minister, S. Jaishankar, gave this deeply revealing interview to the Financial Times. And it breaks down exactly how India managed to navigate this crisis without firing a single shot.
While the West is debating drones and armadas, India successfully negotiated the safe passage of 2 Indian-flagged liquefied petroleum gas carriers right through the blockaded strait.
The Shivalik and the Nanda Devi.
Right.
They safely transported a combined 92,712 metric tons of LPG through the strait on March 14th. Just think about the logistics of that for a second.
It's massive.
Over 92,000 tons of vital energy. LPG is critical for domestic cooking gas and industrial use in India, and they slipped it right through a zone where 16 other ships had just been attacked.
Right. So the question is, how did they actually pull this off?
Exactly. And Jaishankar's explanation is basically a masterclass in the mechanics of sustained statecraft. He was very clear to point out that there is no formal blanket arrangement.
Right. It's not like you just fly an Indian flag and get a free pass forever.
No. And crucially, he stressed that Iran did not receive any concessions in return. India didn't trade anything away to get these ships through.
So what was it based on?
He said the safe passage was purely based on, to use his exact words, reasoning and coordination.
Wow. Reasoning and coordination. It's so counterintuitive to how we normally view global conflict.
It really is. It's not this transactional security-driven thing.
Yeah.
I mean, it makes me think of navigating a highly volatile neighborhood dispute.
Okay, how so?
Well, imagine one neighbor, let's say Trump in this scenario, is trying to organize this heavily armed neighborhood watch. He's bringing in floodlights and security cameras.
Right.
But another neighbor, India, just quietly walks over, has tea with the angry neighbor, and just gets their car out of the driveway safely without any of the drama.
That's a really sharp analogy because it highlights exactly why European nations can't simply replicate what India just did.
Why not?
Because diplomacy isn't, copy-paste software code. You can't just adopt India's strategy overnight. Each country's relationship with Tehran is entirely unique.
Built on decades of specific history, right?
See, exactly. Historical, economic, and cultural interactions. India hasn't just shown up in the middle of a crisis demanding safe passage. They have maintained a highly complex, multi-layered relationship with Iran for decades.
Like their investments in the Chabahar port.
Yes. They've navigated incredibly complex sanctions regimes, and historically they've maintained this stance of strategic autonomy, engaging with both Washington and Tehran simultaneously.
Right.
And that deep well of relational capital, that's what allows for this specific kind of dialogue when a crisis suddenly erupts.
But, I have to push back on this a bit.
Sure.
Is diplomacy of this nature truly sustainable in a hot conflict zone? 16 ships have been attacked. The region is a powder keg. Did India just get lucky this time?
That's a fair question.
Did they just manage to thread the needle and get the Shivalik and Nanda Devi through before this situation escalates to a point where nobody gets through, regardless of how much relational capital they have?
It's the critical question. And honestly, it's a reality that Jaishankar himself openly acknowledges in the interview.
He does.
Yeah, he called this passage early but meaningful progress, but he immediately noted that ongoing, continuous discussions remain absolutely necessary because the situation is so highly volatile.
Meaning it could change tomorrow.
Exactly. The risk of sudden, uncontrollable escalation is always there. A single miscalculation by any party could just shut the strait down completely.
But what India is proving right now.
Right. What they're proving is that when military posturing creates an immediate, rigid deadlock, localized, relationship-based diplomacy can still find a way to keep the lights on.
Yeah. Even the U.S. Energy Secretary, Chris Wright, is acknowledging this reality. He stated he hopes China can play a similar constructive diplomatic role to reopen the strait.
Which is really a tacit admission that gunboats might simply not be the right tool for this specific puzzle.
Wow. Okay, so from the complexities of negotiating peace and safe passage abroad, we need to pivot to a very different kind of negotiation.
Let's do it.
We're moving from the global stage to the domestic arena, looking at how power is organized, contested, and managed right here within India itself, because the massive gears-grinding machinery of the world's largest democracy is spinning up.
The Election Commission of India.
Yes, the ECI has officially announced the schedule for the 2026 Assembly elections.
And every time we look at Indian elections, we just have to pause and process the sheer logistical scale of the operation.
It's hard to even conceptualize.
It is arguably the largest coordinated peacetime logistical exercise in human history, and they pull it off consistently.
So we're looking at upcoming assembly elections across Assam, Kerala, Puducherry, Tamil Nadu, and West Bengal, and our sources provide the raw numbers, and they're just staggering.
Let's hear them.
We're talking about 17.4 crore eligible electors.
174 million people preparing to vote.
Yes. The ECI has to manage 824 different constituencies. They're setting up 2.19 lakh, that's 219,000 individual polling stations.
Unbelievable.
And to physically execute this, they have to mobilize, train, and deploy 2.5 million polling personnel.
I mean, think about what it actually takes to move 2.5 million personnel securely.
Along with all the electronic voting machines.
Right. The EVMs, moving them across incredibly diverse terrain. You have the dense urban sprawl of Kolkata, the remote tea gardens of Assam, the coastal regions of Kerala.
It requires a level of administrative orchestration that is just almost incomprehensible.
It really is.
The schedule itself kicks off with single-phase voting in Assam, Kerala, and Puducherry on April 9th. Tamil Nadu goes to the polls on April 23rd. But West Bengal is uniquely structured.
Yeah, they're voting in two distinct phases, April 23rd and April 29th, with the final counting for all regions set for May 4th.
And during the announcement, Chief Election Commissioner Ganesh Kumar heavily emphasized that pure electoral rolls are the absolute bedrock of the democratic process.
He highlighted the special intensive revision that took place across 13 states to clean up the data.
Which brings us right to the first major friction point, where this massive administrative machine meets the volatile reality of ground-level politics.
Right, because the ECI is trying to maintain pure, objective data and orderly processes.
But in West Bengal, for example, our sources note, there are over 60 lakh entries, 6 million voter identities, on the electoral rolls that are currently under adjudication.
6 million.
Yeah, they're actively being reviewed by court-appointed judicial officers under directions from the Supreme Court.
That administrative friction over who legally gets to participate, it's directly mirroring the intense physical and political friction playing out in the streets.
Absolutely. And as we dive into these political clashes, it's really vital to clarify for you listening that we're examining the claims made by the political parties precisely as they're reported in our sources.
Right. We are analyzing the rhetoric and the nature of the conflict itself completely impartially. We're not validating one side's claims over the other.
Exactly. And the situation in West Bengal is incredibly heated right now. To understand the temperature on the ground, our sources detail a severe clash between the ruling Trinamool Congress, the TMC, and the opposition BJP.
Trinamool Congress MP Mahu Moitra launched a highly publicized, really blistering attack on Prime Minister Narendra Modi.
Right, and this was directly following the vandalism of the Kolkata residence of State Cabinet Minister Shashi Panja.
The optics and the timing of this incident create just a perfect storm of political rhetoric.
because it happened on the exact same day that Prime Minister Modi was speaking at a massive rally at the Brigade Parade Ground in Kolkata.
Where he accused the TMC government of running a Maha Jungle Raj, essentially accusing them of presiding over a great reign of lawlessness.
Right, and Moitra posted a video on social media immediately flipping that exact narrative.
Yeah.
She alleged that it was actually BJP supporters who had brought Jungle Raj to the state.
The specifics of her claim are that these supporters, while en route to the Prime Minister's rally, targeted and vandalized Minister Panja's home.
She claimed they broke windows, attacked the staff on the premises, and terrified the minister's daughters who were inside the house at the time.
And Moitra framed this as a completely unprecedented escalation. She asserted that no political party had ever targeted the private home of a sitting cabinet minister in the state in this manner.
She labeled the attackers as rowdies and fiercely criticized the prime minister for not apologizing for the violence occurring in his name. She stated confidently that Bengal would punish him electorally, just like it did in the 2021 elections.
But what's really crucial here, I think, is how she broadened the scope of her attack beyond just the physical vandalism.
She did. She used the incident to launch a much wider critique. She accused the BJP of systematically eroding the neutrality of constitutional bodies.
She brought up a recent controversy regarding an alleged insult to the president, arguing that the ruling party at the center is reducing the office of the president, the election commission itself, and the Speaker of the House into merely partisan instruments.
And she didn't stop there. She pointedly condemned the prime minister's silence on violence against tribal communities in states where the BJP is in power.
Specifically citing horrific incidents that have occurred in Manipur and Madhya Pradesh.
Right. She used those examples to directly question his moral authority to come to Bengal and lecture the state government on tribal welfare or law and order.
What you are observing here is the complete weaponization of every available narrative.
Yes. There is no longer any neutral ground.
A physical altercation on the street, the scheduling of a presidential event, the rhetoric at a massive rally, it is all instantly folded into this comprehensive, deeply polarized battle for the legitimacy of the state apparatus.
And this hypersensitivity, this weaponization of systems, it isn't just happening in political speeches and street protests.
No, it's bleeding heavily into the judiciary.
Which brings us to our next major area of friction. The intricate legal battles currently paralyzing the courts in Delhi.
This is a fascinating one.
We are watching a highly unusual legal maneuver involving the top leadership of the Aam Aadmi Party. Arvind Kejriwal and Manish Sisodia have actually petitioned the Supreme Court to intervene and change the specific judge hearing the Central Bureau of Investigation's plea in the Delhi High Court.
This is regarding their long-running excise policy case.
Right, and asking the Supreme Court to step in and alter the bench assignment in the High Court. That is a nuclear option in legal strategy.
It really is. It highlights how deeply contentious and utterly fractured the trust in the process has become. To understand why they're taking this extreme step, we really have to trace the absolute whiplash of the recent lower court rulings.
It has been a total roller coaster.
Seriously.
Let's look at the timeline. On February 27th, a trial court delivered a massive verdict. They completely discharged Kejriwal, Sisodia, and 21 other accused individuals in the excise policy case.
And the trial court judge didn't just quietly dismiss the charges. The ruling sharply, publicly criticized the CBI, declaring their entire investigative case to be legally unsustainable.
The trial court actually went a step further, didn't they?
They did. They recommended departmental action against the specific investigating officer involved.
Wow.
Which is a devastating blow to a premier central investigative agency. So naturally, the CBI immediately appeals the discharge to the High Court.
And this is where the current friction ignites. Because the case lands before Justice Swaranakanta Sharma in the High Court.
Right. And on March 9th, during the very first day of hearing the CBI's revision plea, Justice Sharma issues an order to stay, meaning she legally pauses the trial court's order recommending action against the CBI official.
Yeah.
And in her order, she observed that several findings in the massive detailed discharge order from the trial court appeared, in her words, promedi erroneous, and therefore required deeper judicial scrutiny. She then issued notices to all 23 accused to respond.
And this phrase, prima facie erroneous, meaning erroneous on the face of it, at first glance, that is the exact catalyst for the AAP leadership's escalation.
Yes. Kejriwal's representation to the Chief Justice argues that Justice Sharma made this sweeping observation about a detailed lower court judgment without having heard any arguments from the defense team yet.
They're essentially claiming that she has prejudged the merits of the lower court's thorough discharge order without pointing out any specific legal flaws.
Exactly. And initially, they tried to handle this within the High Court itself. They petitioned the Delhi High Court Chief Justice to transfer the case away from Justice Sharma.
But the Chief Justice refused.
He did. He stated that the case was assigned to her via the standard administrative roster system, and there was no valid administrative reason to bypass that system and move it to another bench.
So, having been denied there, they are now knocking on the door of the Supreme Court.
If you step back and connect this to the broader theme, the implications are profound.
Because it's about trust.
Yes. You have the leadership of a major political party overtly challenging the fundamental neutrality of the High Court bench assigned to adjudicate their fate. Simultaneously, you have a central investigative agency aggressively maneuvering to resurrect a high-profile case that a lower court completely demolished.
The courts are increasingly not just the venue where political disputes are resolved. They are the primary arena where the political warfare itself is conducted.
It's like the referee has been dragged into the center of the ring and forced to throw punches.
That's exactly what it feels like.
Yeah.
The system designed to arbitrate the friction has become the source of it. And, this hypersensitivity to institutional bias isn't just happening at the elite levels of the high courts or the massive scale of the election commission.
It filters all the way down.
All the way down to the most mundane bureaucratic processes. Let's look at what just happened with the police recruitment exam in Uttar Pradesh.
This incident is a perfect, almost microscopic example of how deeply entrenched social fault lines can instantly disrupt standard administrative procedure.
What exactly happened?
So, in a written examination for police sub-inspectors held on March 14th, candidates encountered a seemingly standard Hindi vocabulary question. They were asked to identify the correct term for a person who changes according to circumstances.
Just a completely standard multiple-choice format.
Right. The options provided were avsarvadi, which translates to opportunist, nishkapat, meaning innocent or sincere, sabachari, meaning virtuous or of good character.
And the final option?
The final option was pandit, which traditionally translates to a scholar or a learned person.
And the mere inclusion of the word pandit as an option for a question describing someone who changes with circumstances, placing it alongside words like opportunist, that triggered an immediate, explosive political reaction across the state.
Because in the deeply complex socio-political landscape of Uttar Pradesh, the term pandit is intrinsically associated with the Brahmin community.
And political parties and community organizations instantly perceive this not as a vocabulary test, but as a deliberate derogatory slur.
They argued it was projecting a historically respected community as opportunistic chameleons.
Congress leader Pramod Tiwari seized on it immediately, calling it a direct reflection of the current government's underlying mindset.
And Mahesh Pandey, representing the Sarv Brahmin Ekta Sabha, escalated the rhetoric further. He publicly called the exam question a deliberate, orchestrated conspiracy to defame the entire community.
The backlash was so intense, so rapid, and so politically dangerous that the state administration had to scramble to contain the fallout.
Deputy Chief Minister Brajesh Pathak had to issue a public statement clarifying that the government itself strongly objected to the options provided by the examiners.
And Chief Minister Yogi Adityanath took incredibly swift, strict administrative action. He ordered that the specific paper setters responsible, whom the government actually labeled as habitual offenders, be immediately blacklisted from ever working with the state again.
He also mandated the creation of new, strict safeguards in the memorandums of understanding with all future exam-creating agencies.
These new rules are designed to ensure that absolutely no disrespectful or controversial references to any caste, sect, or religion ever appear in state documents again.
The ruling BJP really framed the entire incident as a dangerous, likely intentional attempt to poison society and undermine social harmony.
So think about the progression we've just discussed.
A lot.
We have the ECI trying to impartially manage 174 million voters while politicians trade accusations of jungle raj and state complicity in violence. We have chief ministers going all the way to the Supreme Court to argue that high court judges are biased against them. And we have a single vocabulary word on a provincial police exam causing a statewide political crisis requiring intervention from the chief minister himself.
Which forces you to ask, are we seeing a fundamental shift?
Are the legal, administrative, and bureaucratic systems of the state no longer functioning as the neutral arenas where societal issues are managed? Have they simply become the primary weapons of political warfare?
I honestly believe that is precisely the shift we are documenting. When the foundational trust in the neutrality of a system severely erodes, every single action generated by that system, whether it's a CBI raid, a judicial stay order, or a multiple choice question on a test, is immediately interpreted through a lens of profound suspicion.
You assume partisan intent.
Exactly. The system is no longer viewed as the impartial referee enforcing the rules of the game. It is viewed as a piece of strategic territory. It is terrain to be conquered, held, and utilized relentlessly against your opponents.
And while massive political parties and state agencies are fighting to control the levers of that state power, we have another set of deeply compelling sources that highlight a very different kind of struggle.
Yes.
We have marginalized groups, distinct regional communities, whose fight isn't to control the state, but simply to be recognized, protected, and allowed self-determination by the state.
This takes us into the fight for identity and constitutional safeguards. We have two distinct narratives here that, on the surface, seem completely unrelated.
But they share a profound thematic core.
They do. We're looking at the ongoing agitation in the Himalayan region of Ladakh and the profound legal anxieties within the transgender community in India.
Let's start in the high altitudes of Ladakh. There has been a significant development. Climate activist Sonam Wangchuk has finally been released.
The central government revoked the National Security Act, the NSA, that had been used to hold him in detention for nearly 6 months.
He was initially arrested back in September during a period of intense, tragically violent protests in the region where 4 people lost their lives in clashes with security forces.
And Wangchuk has undoubtedly become the most visible, internationally recognized face of Ladakh's agitation. But what's crucial to understand is that his release, while certainly welcomed by the key political groups, the Less Apex Body and the Kargil Democratic Alliance, it is not ending the movement.
No. In fact, following his release, they are deliberately resuming a region-wide shutdown.
Right, because his detention under the NSA was a symptom of the friction, not the root cause of it.
They aren't just protesting for one man's freedom. They are engaged in a fundamental strike for statehood and for specific, robust protections under the 6th schedule of the Indian Constitution.
And to really understand why this community is so determined, we have to look back at the mechanics of what happened in August 2019.
That was the watershed moment. The abrogation of Article 370 and the bifurcation of the former state of Jammu and Kashmir.
Right. At that time, Ladakh was carved out and made into a separate union territory. And it's important to note that initially, this move was actually celebrated by many in the Buddhist-majority region of Leh.
Wangchuk himself was initially supportive, right?
He was. There was a genuine hope that direct administration from New Delhi would finally bring much-needed development, infrastructure, and better national integration, freeing them from what they felt was neglect by the administration in Srinagar.
But the reality of what it actually means to be a union territory without a legislature quickly set in.
Very quickly. They realized they had been placed into a political vacuum. They were now being governed entirely by an unelected lieutenant governor appointed by the center.
So they were losing their local democratic voice over the most critical aspects of their lives, their land, their local jobs, and their incredibly unique, highly fragile ecology.
Exactly. And this shared realization of disenfranchisement led to something historically rare and politically potent. A united political front forming between the Buddhist-majority district of Leh and the Muslim-majority district of Kargil.
That unity is unprecedented.
It speaks to the depth of their shared anxiety. They realize that without the specific constitutional safeguards provided by the 6th schedule, which is a framework specifically designed to protect indigenous and tribal populations by granting them significant autonomy over land, resources, and local governance through autonomous district councils, their distinct cultural identity and environment were at severe risk.
Risk of being swallowed by outside administrative edicts and large-scale commercial interests.
Precisely. Now, the center has attempted to manage this, holding multiple rounds of talks with Ladakhi representatives over the past year.
But the local leaders claim the government point-blank refuses to entertain the core demands of statehood or 6th schedule status. Consequently, talks have been completely stalled since February 4th.
The Union Home Ministry continues to state that they are committed to providing all necessary safeguards, but the local leaders aren't buying vague assurances.
Sajjad Kargili, a prominent leader of the Kargil Democratic Alliance, made their position crystal clear. Revoking Wangchuk's NSA detention is a positive step, But it doesn't diminish their underlying struggle for their legitimate rights by one iota.
They are actively choosing to endure the economic hardship of shutting down their own region to force the central state to acknowledge and legally codify their unique identity.
Now hold that thought about a community fighting against the state's rigid, top-down administrative structures to protect their inherent right to self-determination. Because if we pivot to our next source, we see the exact same philosophical battle playing out. But the battleground isn't geography, it's the human body.
The transgender community in India is raising a massive alarm right now.
They are warning that proposed amendments to the Transgender Persons Protection of Rights Act 2019 will effectively roll back their hard-won civil rights by an entire decade.
And the absolute core of this conflict comes down to a single, highly charged concept: verification.
Verification.
Yes.
Yeah.
The government is seeking to introduce official, formalized verification processes, potentially requiring individuals to be examined by a state-appointed medical board before a person can be legally issued a transgender identity certificate.
And activists are pointing out that this proposed mechanism directly contradicts the foundational legal precedent set by the landmark 2014 Supreme Court Nelson judgment,
which was monumental,
because it affirmed the core legal principle of gender self-identification. It essentially ruled that a person's gender identity is deeply intrinsic to who they are, and they do not need a doctor, a psychiatrist, or a bureaucrat to validate or grant it to them.
Exactly. The Nelson judgment shifted the power of definition from the state to the individual. Jayanth, the founder of Queer Nilayam in Hyderabad, spoke extensively in our sources about how this new proposal is triggering widespread panic and anxiety.
You can imagine.
For many individuals in the community, the mere idea of having to stand before a panel of government-appointed doctors to provide proof of who they are is deeply invasive and severely re-traumatizing.
We saw protests erupt from students at the University of Hyderabad. They warned that this kind of legislation inevitably leads to the heightened policing of transgender bodies and constitutes a severe state-sanctioned violation of personal privacy.
We have a quote from Patrini Sastry, a non-binary activist who made such a piercing, logically undeniable point.
What did they say?
They stressed that no cisgender person is ever required to provide medical proof of their identity to the government. Sastry highlighted that trans identity is fundamentally rooted in psychological reality, lived experience, and community belonging.
How do you even begin to design a medical test to verify that, especially in a country that, as many activists note, severely lacks trans-friendly healthcare infrastructure and sensitivity to begin with?
Right, and we also heard compelling arguments from the medical community itself. Dr. Prashi Rathore, one of India's first transgender doctors, argued forcefully that this proposed medicalization is not only ethically unjustifiable, but it is scientifically completely unsound.
How so?
As she clearly pointed out, transgender persons are not patients suffering from a disease that needs diagnosing. And there is absolutely no objective, quantifiable medical test. You can't draw blood, you can't take an X-ray, you can't run a genetic panel that can definitively determine whether someone is transgender.
So look at the incredibly profound parallel here. We have the state trying to assert its control by demanding the physical medical verification of gender identity while simultaneously trying to assert its administrative control over Ladakh by refusing constitutional autonomy and insisting on governing via an unelected bureaucratic lieutenant governor.
It is the eternal tension between the state's inherent bureaucratic desire to categorize, measure, control, and administer efficiently versus a community's fundamental human right to self-determination and dignity.
The state always wants clean blueprints. It wants standardized forms and quantifiable data.
But human identity, deeply rooted culture, and regional heritage simply do not fit neatly into those boxes.
Imagine the profound indignity of being told you need a panel of government-appointed doctors to examine you before you are legally allowed to exist as the person you've always known you are.
Yeah.
Or imagine your entire region, your mountains, your culture, your history, being told that your unique identity doesn't warrant the very constitutional protections that were written into law for that exact specific purpose.
It's a heavy thought.
But I do want to push back a little here, just playing devil's advocate to explore the mechanics of this.
Go for it.
Doesn't the state, any state, have to have some objective standard of verification for legal and administrative purposes? I mean, if the government is allocating specific resources, benefits, or legal protections based on an identity, how do you balance that unavoidable bureaucratic necessity with human dignity?
It's a very fair central question, and honestly, it is the absolute crux of administrative law. The state does need systems to distribute resources efficiently and ensure rights are granted accurately to those who need them.
Right.
But the passionate argument coming from both Ladakh and the trans community is that the state's proposed methods of verification are wildly disproportionate. They argue these methods are unnecessarily invasive, culturally tone-deaf, and ultimately designed to restrict access and exert control rather than empower the citizens.
Because the Analysa judgment already provided a perfectly functional legal framework, self-declaration supported by an affidavit.
Exactly. The activists are arguing that adding a medical board on top of that isn't about administrative efficiency, it's about gatekeeping.
Speaking of systems, rules, and the people who have to navigate them, what happens when a system is built on an underlying assumption of trust, and human beings figure out how to exploit the blind spots in that blueprint?
Yes.
We are going to transition from people fighting honorably for their fundamental rights to people fighting for a free flight or, well, a cheap, cruel scam. Let's look at a spectrum of how systems are exploited.
And we have two incredible, highly detailed examples here of systemic exploitation. One happening in the polished, air-conditioned corridors of corporate HR, and the other happening in the murky, coercive corners of a Mumbai dating app racket.
Let's start with the corporate side. Our sources reveal that Air India has just caught over 4,000 of its own employees actively misusing the Employee Leisure Travel Policy, widely known as the ELT.
4,000 employees. You really have to pause on that number.
Yeah, that is not a few bad apples.
No, that is a staggering, systemic scale of internal, white-collar fraud. The ELT policy itself is a fantastic corporate perk. It's designed to give employees and their strictly eligible nominees, like spouses, children, and dependent parents, a specified number of free air tickets every financial year.
We are talking about highly valuable benefits, up to 14 passages or return tickets annually, which even include flexible open-jaw travel options.
But a detailed internal investigation driven by the new management found that staff members were brazenly exploiting the trust built into this system.
They were falsely listing completely unrelated individuals, friends, acquaintances, or entirely random people as their family nominees to secure these free flights.
And the investigation uncovered that it gets significantly worse. Some employees had actively turned this into an organized side hustle. They were taking these complimentary tickets and illegally selling them to outsiders at a pure profit.
It is textbook white-collar fraud. It relies entirely on exploiting HR loopholes and the basic assumption that a massive corporation isn't going to spend the resources to aggressively audit the marriage certificates or birth certificates of thousands of employees every single time a ticket is booked.
But Air India is currently undergoing a massive top-to-bottom transformation under the ownership of the Tata Group. They are aggressively tightening the net and professionalizing the culture.
And the crackdown is severe. They are now mandating strict, verifiable proof of relationship for all nominees across the board. They are demanding financial refunds for the fraudulently availed flights, and they are imposing heavy disciplinary penalties on the employees involved.
Internal company sources were quoted calling it a failure at multiple levels of oversight, raising very serious questions about the ethical standards that had been allowed to fester within the organization.
Now, I want you to contrast that highly organized, largely invisible corporate grift with a much more visceral, physical, street-level exploitation.
The Mumbai case.
Yes. Mumbai police recently dismantled a massive, highly coordinated extortion racket, a classic honey trap operating out of a cafe in Andheri East called Heaven Terrace 72.
The mechanics of this sound like something directly out of a crime thriller. The Sakanaka police received a tip-off about the racket and decided to set up an elaborate sting operation.
They sent in a 38-year-old businessman named Pankaj Govinyadav to act as a decoy.
Right. He was instructed to go on Tinder, match with a specific profile of a woman, and agree to meet her for a date at this specific cafe.
And the moment he arrives and sits down, the trap springs. The police are positioned, watching the entire interaction unfold. Yadav served a drink that the staff claims is premium alcohol.
He consumes it, the woman briefly makes an excuse to leave, and then the cafe staff immediately hand him a bill for 18,616.
Over 18,000 rupees for a single drink. And here is the absolute kicker. The police investigation quickly revealed that the cafe didn't even possess a liquor license.
They were serving basic water or cheap mixers, disguised as alcohol, at wildly inflated extortionate prices, and then using large bouncers to physically intimidate the men into paying the bill before they could leave.
The police swooped in and arrested 13 people. And when you look closely at the mechanics of the racket, It is a highly sophisticated, multi-tiered operation specifically designed to exploit social vulnerabilities.
You have two men, identified as Shoaib and Azim Sadiq, who are apparently running the digital side, meticulously selecting male profiles on Tinder based on perceived vulnerability or wealth.
You have women who are specifically brought in from Delhi, flown in to act purely as the bait to lure the men to the physical location.
And then you have the cafe managers and the bouncers to execute the final extortion.
The police booked them for extortion, cheating, and common intention under the Bharatiya Nyaya Sanhita, plus significant violations under the IT Act. It is essentially organized crime leveraging a dating algorithm.
Exactly. The Air India fraud exploits administrative loopholes and the sheer, overwhelming volume of corporate data. The Tinder honey trap exploits human psychology loneliness, the deep desire for connection, and crucially, the victim's paralyzing fear of public embarrassment.
The entire scam relies on the calculation that a man on a dating app rendezvous gone horribly wrong will simply pay the money to avoid the shame of calling the police or causing a scene.
It's chillingly effective.
And just to provide a tiny, necessary glimmer of hope that not all systems are entirely broken or inevitably corrupted by human nature, our sources also briefly note an upcoming update from the National Highways Authority of India, the NHAI.
Right, they are raising the FASTag annual pass fee from $3,000 to $3,075, effective April 1st.
Which on the surface seems like a very dry, mundane administrative note. But look at the broader context of what FASTag represents.
It is an RFID-based passive tag system that links directly to a user's bank account for seamless toll payments.
It currently has over 56 lakh active users, operating across 11,150 toll plazas nationwide. It is a massive, highly complex, nationwide technological system that largely works exactly as it was intended to work.
Significantly reducing physical congestion and streamlining financial transactions.
It's the rare example of the blueprint actually functioning beautifully in reality. But analyzing these three systems brings up a much broader, somewhat unsettling point.
What's that?
If 4,000 employees at a major national airline are casually running an organized side hustle on company tickets, and local cafes are running sophisticated extortion rings via dating apps, does this point to a fundamental breakdown in basic societal trust? Or is this just the inevitable, eternal cat-and-mouse game of modern life? You build a better lock, someone eventually builds a better lockpick.
It's almost certainly the latter. As our systems become increasingly complex and detached from face-to-face interaction, whether it's digital tolling, sprawling corporate benefits portals, or algorithmic matchmaking, the surface area for potential exploitation grows exponentially. The FASTag system works incredibly well right now, but it requires constant, vigilant technological maintenance to stay ahead of cloning or digital fraud. Trust is not a static resource that you can just assume exists. It is something that has to be continuously audited, verified, and enforced.
Air India is painfully learning that lesson right now.
Absolutely.
Well, after a heavy, intense deep dive into global shipping blockades, partisan street violence, legal warfare, the profound trauma of marginalized communities, and widespread systemic fraud, we desperately need a palate cleanser.
We really do.
We need to look at moments where human endeavor, dedication, and natural beauty just absolutely shine, without caveats, without hidden agendas, and without friction. Let's look at some blooms and bats.
It is absolutely vital to remember that alongside all this immense societal complexity, there are arenas where excellence is unambiguous and universally celebrated.
The BCCI Name It Awards for 2026 just took place in New Delhi, and they highlighted the absolute pinnacle of Indian cricket, recognizing athletes who have mastered their incredibly demanding craft.
Smriti Mandhana and Shubman Gill were named the best international cricketers.
Let's talk about Shubman Gill first, because his consistency has been unreal. He took home the Pali Umrigar Award for the second time. His 2025 season was just a masterclass in reliability under pressure.
During the incredibly grueling 5-test tour of England, where he also served as captain, he topped the series charts with 754 runs across 10 innings.
He averaged an astonishing 75.40 inning English conditions, hitting 4 centuries with a massive high score of 269. Plus, he anchored the team with an unbeaten 101 in the Champions Trophy against Bangladesh.
To understand how difficult that is, you have to understand the mechanics of batting in England. You are dealing with the Duke ball, which swings significantly more and for much longer than the Kookaburra ball used elsewhere.
Right.
You are dealing with overcast weather conditions that constantly aid the fast bowlers. For Gill to go there, take on the captaincy, and average over 75, it shows a technical mastery and a psychological resilience that cements him as the anchor of the men's team across all formats.
But as impressive as Gill was, Smriti Mandhana's year was genuinely historically unprecedented. She won her award for a record fifth time. She amassed a staggering 1,703 international runs across formats in 2025.
And the specific records she obliterated along the way are breathtaking. She scored 1,362 runs in one-day internationals alone.
That is the highest number of runs scored by any woman in a single calendar year in the history of the sport.
She became the very first batter in women's ODI history to cross the 1,000-run milestone in a single year. And crucially, she was the top run getter for India in their maiden Women's World Cup title victory, performing when the stakes were at their absolute highest.
And perhaps the most spectacular jaw-dropping statistic of her entire year. She smashed a 50-ball century against Australia.
100 runs off 50 deliveries.
That is the fastest ODI 100 ever scored by an Indian player, completely surpassing Virat Kohli's legendary 52-ball mark. She isn't just playing the game. She is entirely rewriting the record books through a combination of elegant technique and sheer aggressive power.
The BCCI also rightly took the time to honor absolute legends of the game like Roger Binney, Rahul Dravid, and Mithali Raj with Lifetime Achievement Awards, properly recognizing the strong shoulders upon which generational players like Gill and Mandhana currently stand.
It is just pure, unadulterated excellence. It's the result of thousands of hours of unseen, frictionless dedication. And speaking of breathtaking displays that require immense unseen dedication, our final source takes us to Srinagar.
Jammu and Kashmir Chief Minister Omar Abdullah shared some early, highly anticipated glimpses of the Indira Gandhi Memorial Tulip Garden.
It is officially recognized as Asia's largest tulip garden. And even though it's still technically a week away from full bloom, Abdullah described the landscape as already bursting with color.
It officially opens to the public on March 16th, effectively kicking off the crucial summer tourist season following the Almond Blossom Festival.
The scale of this horticultural achievement is truly hard to visualize unless you are standing in it. We're talking about 18 lakh tulips.
1.8 million individual flowers, carefully curated across more than 70 distinct varieties. They don't just plant tulips. The garden incorporates daffodils, hyacinths, ranunculi, and iris flowers to create a staggered, overwhelmingly vibrant visual tapestry.
Think about the pure mechanics of that. Coordinating the planting, the soil chemistry, and the precise timing of 1.8 million bulbs so they all peak simultaneously in a highly specific weather window. It is a staggering amount of human care and horticultural science going into creating a temporary sensory masterpiece.
And it serves a vital, highly pragmatic economic purpose as well. It acts as a massive magnet, driving domestic and international tourism to the Kashmir Valley, which creates a vital multiplier effect for local hotels, transport, and artisans.
But beyond the economics, it's a powerful cultural touchstone. In a world full of the complex, grinding friction we spent the last hour dissecting, sports and nature provide instances of unifying, uncomplicated joy.
Mandhana and Gill represent the absolute pinnacle of human dedication and physical training. The tulip garden represents the enduring, meticulous cultivation of beauty, proudly maintained despite the historically complex and often painful political backdrop of Jammu and Kashmir.
So what does this all mean when we put the pieces together? When I look at Smriti Mandhana effortlessly obliterating historical records, or when I picture walking through a meticulously maintained field of 1.8 million blooming tulips against the backdrop of the Himalayas, it feels like the perfect, necessary reminder of what happens when human dedication and care are allowed to flourish without systemic friction. It is the counterbalance we need.
Beautifully said.
We've covered an immense amount of ground today. We started with S. Jaishankar's quiet, deeply relational diplomacy, managing to slip massive gas carriers safely through the heavily blockaded, militarized Strait of Hormuz. We looked at the dizzying 174 million voter scale of the ECI's democratic machinery and explored exactly how that system is constantly challenged and weaponized by partisan violence in West Bengal, by high-stakes legal chess matches over excise policies in Delhi, and by deep-seated caste sensitivities erupting over a single vocabulary word on a police exam in UP.
We explored the deeply personal and profound fights for constitutional rights, contrasting Ladakh's strike for regional autonomy and the protections of the Sixth Schedule with the transgender community's urgent fight against the indignity of invasive medical verification.
We uncovered the bizarre, highly organized world of systemic exploitation, contrasting 4,000 Air India employees gaming the corporate HR system with a sophisticated Tinder extortion racket serving 18,000 rupee water in Mumbai. And we ended, thankfully, with the soaring triumph of Indian cricket and the breathtaking, meticulous arrival of Kashmiri Spring.
It is a vast, complicated landscape. But as we wrap up this deep dive, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. It builds on a current that ran silently but powerfully through almost all of the sources we examined today. Think deeply about the reviving concept of verification.
Verification.
Yes. Think about how much of our modern world is currently being built on the increasingly heavy, fragile architecture of having to prove things. In the Strait of Hormuz, nations are struggling to verify their peaceful intent amidst an active war zone, forced to rely on historical trust because paper treaties and international laws have failed to provide security.
Right.
In India, the transgender community is fighting a desperate battle against the profound indignity of medical boards demanding they scientifically verify their internal gender identity, while the people of Ladakh are shutting down their own economy, demanding the central state verify and legally protect their unique regional identity through constitutional safeguards.
Even at the most mundane corporate level, Air India is now being forced to painstakingly verify if a passenger is actually an employee's legal spouse, because the basic honor system collapsed under the weight of 4,000 instances of fraud.
Exactly. We're moving rapidly into an era where trust is seemingly no longer the default setting of society. Everything requires a certificate, a diplomatic assurance, a medical board stamp of approval, or a digital RFID tag linking to a bank account.
The question for you to consider as you watch the news this week is this. As our administrative, legal, and technological systems get better and better at verifying us, at categorizing us, and aggressively checking our credentials, are we slowly losing the basic, unquantifiable human trust that actually holds society together in the first place?
It brings us right back to the very beginning. We constantly crave the clean, predictable blueprint. We want the perfect machine, but the real world is incredibly messy, deeply human, and full of friction. And learning how to actively navigate that muddy water rather than just pretending it's clear or demanding it be filtered is the real challenge ahead of us.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive today. Keep questioning the rigid systems around you, keep looking for the human nuance behind the headlines, and most importantly, stay curious. We will be right back here with you on the next deep dive.